across to Melbourne now and get the latest from the Australian newspaper's Victorian political reporter, Rachel Baxendale, who's been all over the pandemic problems in that state for the last 18 months. Good to talk to you again, Rachel. Is there clarity in Victoria now as to what Daniel Andrews' plan is? Because today he was boasting that there would have been a lot more infections, more than 2,200, if not for the lockdown. At the same time, he was saying the lockdown's effectively going to come off next week.
Look, we are getting some clarity. It was interesting today. There were sort of two different press conferences in Victoria that happened not quite simultaneously, but Daniel Andrews sort of spoke to journalists at the back door of Parliament on his way into Parliament, and then the health presser, the daily health presser, sort of happened around the corner in the back garden a few minutes later. He was very clear that he is not going to diverge from his roadmap, regardless of what happens with case numbers, which I think will come as a great relief to Victorians. And that despite us, having this record 2,297 cases today, that won't have an impact, and that when we reach 70%, we will follow those roadmap steps. So for Melbourne, that means the lifting of the lockdown probably on Thursday or Friday next week. I think it was scheduled according to the roadmap for the 26th, but thankfully Victorians are getting out and getting vaccinated, and it looks like we'll reach that 70% mark possibly 4 days early. And then the sort of much more substantive, in a lot of ways, measures do wait for 80%, which is likely to be about 10 days later. And that's when we'll be able to go to the regions. We'll be able to have, up to 10 people over to our houses and that sort of thing. What has been really interesting in the numbers is that even though we are seeing, quite scary case numbers, that's not converting necessarily to the numbers that were predicted in the Burnet modelling in terms of hospitalisations and deaths. Deaths are still an utter tragedy, but we are seeing far fewer than were predicted in that modelling. In fact, the hospitalisation rate is about half what was predicted in that modelling, which I think will come as a great relief to people and really does mean there's no excuse for us not opening up as soon as we reach those vaccination targets.
Indeed, it shows the dividend from those vaccination rates. So despite all the hullabaloo, effectively what Victoria is doing is following a similar plan out of this as New South Wales. And you're only 2 to 3 weeks behind what's happening in New South Wales. Let's just have a look at what Daniel Andrews, a little bit more of what he had to say today.
We all desperately want this to be over, but just because we want it to be over doesn't mean it is. But we are literally within days. We just got to finish this off.
Yeah, and as the two states head in that direction, Rachel, of course, Queensland, South Australia, Tasmania, Western Australia, they don't want anything to do with we Easterners. But there's a very good chance that border between Victoria and New South Wales will be opened up pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've already seen that border relaxed, and thankfully those poor communities either side of the Murray who've had their lives hugely disrupted by all of this over the past 18 months. There's a little bit more sense prevailing there in terms of allowing them to go back and forth. Of course, I think the ACT today was declared an orange zone by Victoria, which basically means that people can travel as long as they get a test. And I mean, I asked the question today. I think the ACT's vaccination rates are a bit higher than New South Wales's are, but in terms of per capita numbers of cases, they'd be pretty similar. In fact, New South Wales might even have fewer cases per capita than the ACT. So I would think and hope that, given that the average New South person walking around New South Wales is actually quite a lot less likely to have COVID than the average person roaming around Victoria at the moment, I would have thought it would make sense to relax that rule as soon as possible.
Yeah, I reckon open it up.